It's PT, and the subject today is production real estate photography. And that's we're going to finish this off using Photoshop HDR Pro is what we're going to use today. The reason I say production and I stress production real estate photography is the simple fact that realtors do not pay a lot of money to produce photographs for their websites and display. So we need to find a way that we can make a good quality product in a short amount of time. We don't have an hour to set up each room. We don't have time to set up lights. We don't have an hour to edit each image. We basically have an hour to shoot the whole house. We have an hour to do our post-production editing work and get it out the door. If we took 20 hours to do a 10-room house, and they paid us $200. That's $10 an hour. And, if you work for yourself, $10 an hour is not the same as working for somebody else making $10 an hour. It's more like making $6 an hour. And at that point, it's just not worth it. And plus, 20 hours, you can't do enough homes in a week to make it worthwhile for you. So we've got to find a way to do some quick production work here. Remember, this isn't fine art photography. This isn't doing editorial work for magazines. This isn't even doing fine work for realtors' website for display of a premier home or something like that. This is just for the everyday use. We got to do it quick. We have to do it efficiently, and we have to make it look good. A lot of people complain, but I have to make it perfect, and we don't have the time to make it perfect. This isn't, we're not doing fine art. If you have to be a perfectionist, then you should go do something else. This is not for you. This is doing good quality production work in a quick and efficient manner. So anyway, let's start off. Basically the best way to shoot a room is to use HDR, high dynamic range photography, and we do that by taking a series of images at different exposures and blending them together to make one solid exposure that looks more like what our eyes would see. Let's take a look at this is what a normal photograph would look like. Just shot, if a realtor shot it with their camera phone, it would look something like this, and you can see the windows are all blown out. You don't see any detail there. You can see down in the shadows, there's no detail left here. You can't see any detail in the black leather sofa here and all. So this is, kind of a typical photograph, but not what we want to achieve. So the first thing I do is I set my camera up on a good steady tripod. I set it up about mid-height. I want to get above the furniture, but I don't want to get too high. I don't want to get too low with the photograph. Something that's essential to real estate photography or any architectural photography is that your camera has to be exactly level and plumb. If you can't have, especially we're using wide-angle lenses in most cases for interior work, you can't have the camera angling up or down or tilted from one side to the other. If you have your camera tilted up or down, you're going to get keystoning in the corners of your walls. And if you have the camera tilting up, the wall corners will tilt out, and you won't get straight lines. So it's essential that you have straight lines for good photography work. And also we want it on a tripod and completely level up and down, left and right. Some of the newer cameras have levels built into them. If they do, please use that, and you can get it excellent centered. If not, use your best judgment with your eye, trying to use lines in the room to make sure you are level to that room. We're going to take our first exposure. We're going to take 3 exposures in this case. Normally, if I was doing an outdoor landscape image, I would take maybe 3 exposures. I would probably do more, but usually I do 3 exposures, and I'll do one that's a zero exposure, which is the correct exposure for the scene, and then I would take one plus 2 stops above and minus 2 stops below. Here in interior work, we actually, anytime you have windows in a interior image, the dynamic range is actually higher than most things that will come into contact outdoors. So we have to work a little bit differently. So what I'm going to suggest for this is that we take a center image at 0 meter, and then we take one at +3, 3 stops above, and we take one at -3, 3 stops below, and that will get us the information that we need to make the image. You know, we could go all out, shoot a 7-frame, 1 stop between HDR, but we don't have the time for that. So this is our best solution. It will give you the best image using the least number of frames and the shortest amount of time. So this is our 0 image. How I got the exposure for this is something you have to really look at. Is you don't want to meter on that window. If you meter on that window, your exposure is going to be really dark because it's going to sense there's a lot of light out there. And while we want a dark exposure later on, we don't want this particular one, or we don't want our 0 exposure. So what I did here was I metered on the wall, and even though it's white and that throws off the exposure a little bit, it got me pretty close. It's usually on a white wall you're off by 1 stop, but it got me pretty close. So that I metered just above the picture in the center of the frame on the wall, and got me my 0 exposure. Now to shoot our 3 exposures, in this case I just moved the metering manually, but if you have automatic exposure bracketing in your camera, use that and you'll be able to automate the process. You just press the shutter if you have it set to timer, and it will go through and shoot 3 images with your desired exposure bracketing that you want. In this particular image, I'm shooting at f/16 because I want a deep depth of field so that everything appears in focus. I know focused at the distance or at infinity in this room with a 16 millimeter lens, I know that I will get good focus all the way back to the couch. The equipment I'm using is a Canon 5D Mark IV and a Canon 16 to 35 f4 lens. Well, you need something in those focal lengths to shoot rooms. If you're using APS-C, you probably need down to a 10 millimeter lens to capture room at all. So when we're bracketing, we're going to fix our ISO. In this case, I'm at ISO 100. We're going to fix our aperture at the same. In this case, I'm f/16, which with a 30 megapixel camera like I have is acceptable. You won't get softness at f/16 on that camera. If you have an IPS-C or an APS-C camera, you probably will max out at f11. Is how you can go before you start getting a little bit of diffraction or softening of the image. And if you're shooting with an ultra high megapixel camera, 45 megapixels and above, you probably get a little bit of softness to your image above f11, unless you have the highest quality lenses. In this case, I'm using f/16. It's good with 30 megapixels, and I've got good quality Canon L lens on there. So we're going to have a fixed ISO, we're going to have a fixed aperture, and what we're going to change for our different exposures is our shutter speed. In this case, I'm at 0.4 of a second on this image. I don't care. I'm on a tripod. I can go as long as I need to. In exposure times, I don't need to worry about how low the shutter is going. It's not going to get any shutter blur from that shutter speed in this situation on the tripod. So this is my 0 exposure, and then my next exposure is this is -3. So you can see this exposure gets the more detail in the windows and in the lights in the room. I always turn all the lights on in the room. to just give it a more homey feel, and to lighten up some areas. But it just gives just a nice quality and a little bit of warmth to the room, especially with incandescent balanced lights. Even though these are LED, they're warm white bulbs. That might lead to some problems later on with color balance, because we have the outdoor light, which is about 5,000, 5,500, and these incandescents are around 3,000. But we can make an adjustment later for that to get that right. So this is my -3, and you can see what we're shooting this one for is to get the detail in the outdoor areas here, in the lights and things like that. Everything else has fallen off to deep shadow, but we don't care about that because the next shot we took is +3. This might be just a little bit more than I needed. You can see there's a little bit bloom on the curtains here. So it might be a little bit, but what I'm really looking for is, do I have detail in these shadow areas? Back in here, do I have detail on the arm of this chair, of the chair and sofa, and down into these areas? If you look back on this, you can see these are pretty. There's not a lot of detail in that area. So this is when I'm shooting a +3 shot, I'm looking for the detail in the shadows. That's what the program is going to pick up and place there. So I've got my 3 images shot here, and we're using Bridge. The reason I'm using Photoshop is the person asked me to do this. That's what they're used to using. A lot of people have Photoshop, and that's what they're used to using, so it's a little bit more comfortable. You can do the same exact thing in Lightroom. And in fact, you can even use Photoshop's HDR Pro from Lightroom. All you would do is select your 3 images in Lightroom, and then right-click them and say Edit In, and then HDR Pro, and it will go through the same steps. But you could also, you might say, well, why don't I just do the processing in Lightroom? And yes, you can absolutely do that. It's going to look very similar to what we're doing here. You actually have a few options available in Lightroom. You can do some pre-editing. That's easier to do in Lightroom than it is here. It's possible to do in Photoshop and Bridge, but it's easier to do that in Lightroom. But the one advantage of Photoshop HDR over doing the HDR in Lightroom is that Photoshop, when you get your combined image, when it pulls the 3 images together, it makes a 32-bit file. 32-bit files have more information to work with, and you can work a little harder. You can pull down highlights, you can pull up shadows more without noise on a 32-bit file. When you do it in Lightroom, you end up with a 16-bit file, a DNG file that you work on. You still have plenty of range, but there's actually a slight advantage to doing it in Photoshop. But that's what we're using today. A lot of people also like to use a program called LR Infuse, or Lightroom Infuse. It's a plugin for Photoshop. It works really well. It combines the images for a very natural looking image, not very HDR-y, freaky looking, but it makes a very nice image. But again, it's another program you have to buy and add on, learn how to use, which is really simple. There's not a lot of adjustments available on it. And it's very popular in the people that shoot real estate photography. But again, we're sticking to Photoshop today. So I've selected my 3 images, and I'm just going to come up here to the tool bar or the menu bar, go to Tools, Photoshop, and merge to HDR Pro. So it's going over the Photoshop, and the first thing it's going to do is take our 3 images and align them. It'll make sure that all the lines are lined up between the 3, but we're on a solid tripod. We don't have that problem that it really needs to work hard on the alignment. If we handheld the images, it would work a little bit harder to align them. So it's aligned the 3, and it's come up with a base image to work with. This is what we have here. So we're on our first screen of HDR Pro. There's not much to select here. It's a little bit different on the newer versions than some of the older ones you might be used to, but this is the latest versions of Photoshop and Bridge and ACR. The important things to have is you see the mode is 32-bit mode, and we also want this box checked for complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw. We could also take this off and we could do some steps now, but we really want to do all these in the power of ACR or Adobe Camera Raw. So all we're going to do is go down here to the bottom and click Tone in ACR. And it's going to merge all those, create our master file to work from. And it's going to bring it back into Photoshop. And then the second, it's going to bring up the ACR dialog workspace. Okay, now we're in ACR and we're working our basic image. And again, it looks not that great, nothing amazing. You see the windows are still blown out, the light is blown out. There's not much detail in the shadows here, but this is where we get to use the power of a 32-bit image. The first thing I like to do is work on our white balance. So I'm going to take the color picker. I know these walls are fairly white. It's my house, so I know that. And I'm going to click here. And you can see it just brought it up a little bit. I think we're on, let's see, originally we were as shot at 5,000, which is basically daylight. Even though I shot the, I always shoot with an auto white balance because I can fix it in the raw images later. So I was worried that it might be too cool because we have these incandescent lights balanced. I thought it might pick up on that, but it seems to have picked up pretty well. But still, I'll use the color picker, and I'm just going to click on the wall, something white, and it warms it up just a little bit. And I like to go a little bit to the warm tone for homes. Personally, I just think it works a little bit better, and I think we're pretty good in there. We might make some adjustments later. The first thing I like to do when we have an HDR photo, really what we're doing is we're taking a high dynamic range and we want to make a normal dynamic range out of that image. So we actually want to lower the dynamic range for our final image. And one way we can do that is to start off, and I'm just going to pull the highlights completely back, and I'm going to bring the shadows completely up. We're going to make some changes later to the shadows because we're starting to get a little bit of the overblown, overprocessed HDR look. But as you can see, bringing back those highlights, this is our normal where they're showing highlight warning, showing that it's clipping. We have our clipping warnings on, which we set up here, turning the clipping warnings on. You can also do the clippings for the shadows, and we don't really have too many clipping in the shadows, but so we have those warnings. We took them out, and you can see we brought back a lot of detail to what's outside, brought up some of the detail in here with the shadow control. It's still a fairly dark image, though. It's not really how we would see it with our eyes. So the next thing I want to work on is our overall balance of the image, and we kind of setting a mid-range point here. So we do that with exposure. So I'm going to bring that exposure up quite a bit, because I really, sometimes when you have your exposure too low, you get these blackening areas in some of the highlights, and I really want our highlights, if it's white, it's supposed to be white. So we're going to bring it up quite a bit, even if it will start to overexpose the outside a little bit. Actually, if you were standing inside a house and looking out the window, it would look pretty bright outside there, so I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be perfect look outside the window. So I'm going to bring that up, we're about a stop and a half up on exposure. As you can see, it's blown out the highlights on this light over here, but we can do a quick adjustment on that later. The next thing I want to do is set a white and black point. This sets our absolute white and our absolute black. and I like to do that on all my images. We can do that easily here and automatically if we hold down the Shift key and double click on the white slider. You can see it brought it back to -22 on whites. I'm going to do the same setting a black point, and it brought it back to -12. Something you'll see, and it depends on your taste. I don't like my saturation overblown, but some people do. But HDR tends, when the images are combined, the colors tend to get a little hot. So I might bring back my saturation just a little bit, just to get the kind of weird, freaky look out of it a little bit. And this is also the point. I'm probably going to come back here and I'm going to bring these shadows down. You can see the real time when HDR gets a little freaky is when our midtones just seem too bright in the image and there's not enough contrast in the midtones. So I'm going to bring the shadows down just a little bit to make it look a little bit more realistic. The next thing I like to do is, in the later versions, within I guess about the last year, they've added a texture control in both ACR and also in Lightroom. I like it a lot better than the clarity slider. So I usually bump up the texture a little bit. This brings back some detail in contrast to the detail areas, better than clarity does. But I'll probably still add a little bit, maybe +8 on clarity and all. This gives us really most of what we need in the image. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it. We don't want to spend a lot of time on it. And this pretty much gives us a little bit of what we look like. If we still had some of that blowout and this light and all, what I might do is just grab my adjustment brush here. I'm going to set the highlights down and the whites down. So what I'm basically doing is making a highlight burn brush out of this adjustment brush, and I might just go over this a little bit. I might go over the windows, just give them a slight burn and bring those down just a little bit. And I think this is a little bit too much on this light here. It's drawing our eye's attention there too much. So I might bring those down. But that's really about it. You could go in and check your sharpness. I think our sharpness looks plenty good if you needed to. Let me just get off this adjustment brush and go back to our basic panel. You could go in and go to your detail thing and add a little bit of sharpening. I don't really think I need it. I don't really like images over sharpened. If you find there's a little bit too much noise in some of the shadow areas, I don't really see that noise that bothers me, but you could boost the noise reduction a little bit in the image and all. You can go through if there's any of these other things you like to add if you find too much distortion in the image, but we don't really have any distortion because we shot the image correctly when we shot it, keeping that camera nice and straight. And that's about all I would do to this image. It's pretty much done. We didn't take a whole lot of room. I would have spent even less time if I wasn't talking, but that's pretty much. We have a little bit of darkening here. If we were doing a magazine image, I would go in and I would spend time, evening all these lighting areas out and probably do a lot more work. But we just simply don't have the time. Time is money for sure in this, and this is about all we need to do to get a presentable image for that. So when we're done, we're going to click OK, come back to regular Photoshop. There are things that you like to do in regular Photoshop you can do to the image, including cropping as we have it set here. But I think that's cropped pretty good. I should have moved this garbage can out, but try to go in there and declutter things if clients have left too much in the way, but you can't always move around everything in people's homes. And but just try to do your best to get simple sloppy things out of the way and all. That's our basic image. I'm going to go to close this, and it's going to ask to save the file. And we're going to save it back into our original folder. If you are used to working in Lightroom, you know that it takes the first image and it usually uses that name, but we need to name these. So I'm just going to name it living room. And you can save it at what you're used to using. You can save it as a PSD file, or I usually use TIFF files, and this is saving it as a master file. I'll go later on and I'll make a JPEG in the size that the client might need, but this is full resolution. So I'm just going to save this living room TIFF, hit save. I have it set for Macintosh. If you're on IBM, you can change the bit order to IBM. I never use compression, no need to, plenty of room on our disks these days. Click OK, and we'll be back into Bridge here, and now we can see our final image, and I'm going to compare it to, this is the normal, what realtors would shoot, or a person with just a camera taking a cinema image might, and then this is our finished product. Not too HDR, we might photo a little bit more, but I wouldn't really spend much more time than this. This is gives a pretty good example of what people would like to see. Remember that when realtors post these images, it's the first thing that people see when they go to to a real estate website, and sometimes you can sell the house right from the pictures. So you want it presented well. But again, we don't have the time to do perfection. We have the time to do the best job we can in the least amount of time. And I think this method does a fairly good job of that. And let's just run through one other example real quickly. I also shot in my kitchen. Did the same thing here. This is the zero frame that I shot, so 0 meter. This was a little difficult in the fact that the sun was getting low and about to set, so it was coming through this window pretty hard, so I had to close the blinds on this window. Something else I probably should have done was crop out the back of the refrigerator. We don't like to do that to the looks of that, but we'll fix that a little bit later in the process. But I had to close the blinds on it. So this is our 0 shot. This is our -3 shot again. Again, it's just for the detail in the window and for the detail in the lights. And this is our +3 shot. And again, this one's a little bit way too much. But the only thing I'm really worried about is I want to get the detail down in these areas here. It's way too, of course, it's way blown out by the lighting area, the microwave here, reflections on that, and the window itself. But remember, for our +3 exposure, we're looking for fine detail in shadow areas. And that accomplishes a little bit, I might have gone a little bit lower on all 3 exposures, but there's still plenty to work with. It's not completely, if these areas here were blown out, it wouldn't be good. So again, we're going to select our 3 images, go up to Tools, Photoshop, Merge to HDR Pro. And once again, it's going to align the 3 images in layers. Just take a few seconds to do those 3. And now it's made the image, and now it's going to open it again in HDR Pro's initial frame. Again, we want 32-bit on, complete toning, and camera raw. It'll remember these settings, but it's just the first time you do it. You have to make sure to set them, and tone in ACR. It'll open it back up again. Waiting for ACR to open. The merged image. And merge them, and it opened ACR. Again, the first thing we want to do is check color temperature. This is a little hard one to do because we've got warm light coming through the windows from the late afternoon. We also have these honeytone cabinets that are reflecting a lot of warmth. Even though this is a white wall, it's going to look a little warm because of how the light's coming in, but this refrigerator is white, so I might want to do my color balance on that. And that's about right. We might touch it up after we get through. Again, I'm going to bring my highlights down completely. I'm going to bring my shadows up completely, and I'm going to go for work on the midtone of the image. And I think we'll go about there. And again, we're going to come down to our saturation. I'm going to take a little bit of saturation out of that image, a little bit too much. And we'll go here. Again, hold down Shift, click it, and set our white point, set a black point. And we'll go and give it a little bit of texture, just a little bit of clarity, and we can play with contrast a little bit. Again, I'm going to pull back this shadow, and this will bring a little more realism. Even though I wanted to have those shadows up for my first look, I'm going to bring them back a little bit, make it look a little more realistic, and we might just play with the white balance, temperature, just bring it down a little bit. You know, the temperature, this room is warm. We've got warm light coming in. We've got the honeytone cabinet. It's a brown wall back here. So we don't want to go too cold on it. You know, if we come down here, might get a little bit, the fridge starts getting a little cold, but bring it up just about 5150 in there, and I'm going to make a little bit more of a, brighten it up just a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to grab my adjustment brush, throw in some -20 highlights, -20 on the whites, and I'm just going to burn this window in a little bit again, just to cut back that. I might have to pull the highlights a little bit more to get those overexposures. I think this is a little hot here. A little bit of, bring that area down. Again, you don't want to go crazy and work too much on it. You just want your basics. We'll check 200. We'll check our sharpness. That looks plenty sharp to me. We could add just a little bit if we wanted to, but I don't really like to over sharpen too much. And again, this is looking at 200%. Nobody should be looking at photos at 200%. And I think that's all I want to do in here. It's looking pretty good. We'll click OK again, brings it back into Photoshop. Again, if there are things you like to do in Photoshop, you can do them. Add sharpening there if you like to do high pass filter. I think the one thing I'm going to do is I want to crop this. I want to get rid of this. Even though we've got good geometry, this refrigerator leans back just a little bit, and I don't like the look of that, and I don't like the look of the back, so we've got a little bit cleaner image here, and I think that's just about all we're going to do. And we'll go to save it again, and we'll just name this one Kitchen, because it's the kitchen, and we'll save it as a TIFF again. Of course, you could go and just save it out to a JPEG if you wanted to at that point, if you feel like you're done, but I like to keep them, and I'll do a post-process later on where I batch process them the size that I need, and also I'll change. I shoot in, I process in Pro Photo RGB, also I'll change them to sRGB for the client, and also the dimensions that they may need. They don't need usually 30 megapixel images for their website. They might need 2,000 pixels wide or something like that. But that's for pretty much the basics of it. We want to do it fast, clean, and efficiently, and we don't want to spend a lot of time. I talked a lot, but you really just want minutes to set up in a room. Try to get your best angles, keep your camera straight, and we want to edit efficiently. It really doesn't take that long to do your basic edits and get it fairly good looking. Again, you could spend hours getting every just bit of the image right, but you really only have minutes to work on it. And that's about it. If you got any questions, you can probably email me. If you want to look up some other HDR info, I have a ton over on the hdrimage.com that you can look up, and tons of articles that you can go through. You can use the search bar to find certain things that you're looking for. How many, there's even a basic how to shoot HDR that goes into more detail than I did here. But that's the down and dirty, quick and easy idea for behind production real estate photography and using Photoshop's HDR Pro. And I hope that was a help to you, and we'll see you next time.